Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Nicole, for that lovely introduction. That was so weird. She was like, stand at the back, then walk to Doris Day. I wanted to play Doris Day because... Que sera, sera. Get over it. I'm not going to rock the boat. No, seriously, I can't do anything about it. What will be, will be. This is the way we've always done things. That's life. I am powerless to change the outcome. I accept it because it's too hard to do the opposite. Hands up who's ever felt like that. Oh, come on, we've all been there. No shame in it. No shame in it. If I hadn't got all these things in my hands, I would put my hand up. I'm going to tell you a story shortly about when I first worked in magazines back in the early 2000s, and I accepted things I was powerless to change. Not making a fuss about things that we don't like, that are seemingly unjust, that make us miserable. It's actually often the default, isn't it? Whether it's big things like, I don't know, Ron DeSantis or Trump or climate catastrophe that we really feel powerless to change, or whether it's little things that we just roll with because everyone else does, right? I was asked to come here and talk to you today about the theme of acceptance, but I'm near the speaker. I kind of felt like I was going to have to flip that on the head because these days I've got more experience in not accepting things. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about activism. I wanted to say this. My name is Clare and I'm a fashion activist. As Nicole said, I run a podcast called Wardrobe Crisis. It's based on my book of the same name from 2016. And it's all about trying to connect big stuff with the seemingly insignificant topic of fashion. So each week I interview people that might be scientists or political economists or, I don't know, some expert in soil, and then try and hook you in with the promise of talking about clothes. I would just say that clingy bags is really rad. I know about it. It's upcycled. You really do need to follow this because this is about how we can make sustainable business using dead stock materials, approaching these things with integrity. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. That was good. You can follow me on Instagram if you wish. I would like you to. And you can check out my podcast. It's free, but I'm not here to talk about my work and promote it. I'm here to talk about you guys and when we might choose to not accept things that are not the way we want them to be, when we might go for activism over acceptance. And I'm going to do that by telling you a little bit about my journey in fashion. I won't repeat the title on that slide. But first, I like to pace, but I'm scared of the speaker. I'll stay here. But first, what comes to mind when you think of the word activism or activist? The classic definition of an activist is someone who, we classically think of them as someone who takes a stand, either in solidarity with or in opposition to a potentially controversial issue or an injustice. And, maybe you're thinking about who have we got there? Greta, catalysing school strike for action, or Gandhi standing against British colonialism in India, or Dr. King leading the civil rights movement in the 1960s, or the suffragettes, or Eddie Mabo standing for land rights in Australia, or Malala standing up for women's education. We've got Amanda Wynne there who catalysed the Stop Asian Hate campaign or movement in the US, and then Amanda Gorman standing up for Black Lives Matter. These are icons. These are famous people who've changed the lives and outcomes and outlooks of millions of people across the world. But I would like to say to you that you don't have to be a famous or powerful activist and icon to do the right thing and step up for what you believe in. As creatives, we use our creativity every day to stand for or against all sorts of things, right? They might be big things or they might be tiny, but it's all good. This act of standing up for something, maybe it's something that makes us or others miserable. Standing up and saying, we're not going to simply shrug and accept it. I think that's powerful, and I think that's something we can all do in our day-to-day work. And I love that we're here owning the word creativity. People always go, I'm not creative. I feel like people also go, I'm not an activist. And I get it, it's scary to own this stuff and to say, step up and say I can do it. But actually we've all got that spark within us. I had to have notes. I'm going to turn the page. I watched all these people with no notes. I was like, really? You are not as busy as me. I feel like this act of creativity is core to the whole idea of what you do if you work in the creative industries. Designing something, communicating a message, making something out of nothing. You don't just want to accept what's gone before, do you? I loved who shouted out the thing that they want to not accept is mediocrity. Thank you. I once worked for a woman who said, why do you try and make things so good? Just do a reasonable job, do a pass. I was like, I need to leave this job. And I did. Now, I'm a writer, so I love words and I love looking at definitions and thinking about how we use words and define things. I checked my, I was going to bring it, but it's a brick, physical dictionary. It's a 1987 Collins English Dictionary edition. And I looked at it for definitions of acceptance and activism. The Collins says, the act of accepting is about favourable reception and assent. I feel like Doris Day had more to say than that. I prefer this definition here, which is how human psychologists look at acceptance. You can read it there. But I think the highlighted bit is the important bit. So it's a person's assent to the reality of a situation, recognising a process or condition, often a negative or uncomfortable situation. We have to sit with the discomfort with this stuff when we refuse to accept things we don't believe in, without attempting to change or protest it. I do actually have a definition from my Collins of the opposite, which is activism. Can I just say, I took this picture of my dictionary yesterday. I did prepare, because there weren't any stock images for acceptance. This is my genuine dictionary. And here you can see it's quite funny, because it's like the 80s, so it's like a policy of taking direct and often militant action to achieve an end, especially a political or social one. I'm happy to talk about myself as a fashion activist and nobody thinks I'm a militant. I think our definition of activism these days has changed a lot. If you think about brand activism, has that watered it down? Does that mean that somehow it's not as meaningful as it might otherwise have been if Nike makes a stand as an activist company? Maybe. In this country, right now, there are people risking their freedom with these new draconian laws we have to stand up for things like native forests. So it is complicated. I'd also say that sometimes acceptance can be a powerful act as well. I'm not going to get into that here, but of course there's the spirituality of accepting things, recognising that or believing that the universe has a plan for you. That can be powerful, but I think that's a story for another day. So I want to talk about agitation. And I'm turning the page. Damn those people who rehearsed every single line. Oh yeah. I wanted to share some pithy quotes about why we might take action. I tried to find one from Albo. They just weren't Instagram worthy yet, but of course Obama is very Instagram worthy. You can see that quote there, it's perfect. The best way not to feel hopeless is to get up and do something. Don't wait for good things to happen to you. Anyone do that? I do. That's the act of acceptance. Oh, we'll just see what happens, it'll be all right. No, get out and do something. That's what Obama wants us to do. And I know it's a cliche, but all cliches are based on truth, right? Who is he standing with? Does anyone know? Yes, Liz, tell us.
Yes, this young woman is from Bali, Indonesia, and she is the founder of Bye-Bye Plastic Bags. She's an activist and quite an incredibly influential activist in Indonesia and worldwide.
Yes. So she is fab. She founded, Liz is working in Indonesia in plastic pollution, so that's why I asked her. But Melati Wiesen, She founded something called Bye Bye Plastic Bag. She was 12 because she refused to accept the pollution that she saw around her where she lives in Bali. And she and her sister decided to set up an activist organisation at 12. I met her actually. She was about 16 when I met her. She was amazing. So I follow her on Instagram. And the other day I saw that she'd posted this picture. She'd been asked to open for Obama on his speaking tour in Germany. And afterwards she got to meet him and he said, "Do you want to take a selfie?" And she said, "No, I want to take this back-to-back power picture." And he said yes, and she won. She was daring greatly. I've nicked this from Brené Brown. I wish I'd written her book. It's bloody good. I write books, by the way, not as good as Brené's. It's not even Brené's quote, but she uses it. It's from the US President Theodore Roosevelt. "Oh, Baba, hello. Do you like this talk?" "Thank you, sweetheart. You are daring greatly." "Oh my gosh, you are very cute." Okay. So, Teddy Roosevelt. "Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much because they live in the grey twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat." Oof. Who wants to do that? I'd rather be Malati. You are so sweet. And it's also good to see so many dogs here today. Love it. On this slide you can see the classic definition of sustainable development from the United Nations. This is something that underpins the work that I do and makes me refuse to accept the fashion industry as it currently operates. You can see there it's all about, in summary, don't trash the joint. Don't leave it in a worse state than we found it in. Oh, has anyone ever seen this? What's your name?
Oh, my name's Talia.
Talia. What is this? We can see the sign.
These are the planetary boundaries, and the green is so it's things like ocean acidification, land use change, climate change.
Yeah.
And the green is the where we want to stay within to maintain a healthy planet that's livable for humans, and anything beyond that is danger zone.
Talia, you did a much better attempt at defining that than I would have done. Thank you very much. So the planetary boundaries were defined by the Stockholm Resilience Centre in 2009, and as Talia said, they basically delineate safe zones within which we must operate as humanity if we want to be still here in the future and for our kids to be. So the main thing you need to know, and I can send links to anyone who wants to see this, is that orange, bad, green, good. So you can see that aerosol loading, hole in the ozone layer. I like to point that one out because that's green, which is good because we turned it around. We're no longer in great danger from the hole in the ozone layer. As of May 2022, 5 out of 9 of these boundaries had been eclipsed. More reasons not to accept the way we do things because it's the way we've been doing it for a while. I wanted to share my quote from Richard Dennis. Richard Dennis is an economist who was on the first series of my podcast. He accused me of spreading affluenza. That's the title of his exceptional book. You should read it. There's another one actually, Curing Affluenza. Anyway, he defines it as that strange desire we feel to spend money we don't have, to buy things we don't need, to impress people we don't know. Thank you, Richard Dennis. I wanted to fight our climate crisis. I wanted to be part of the change and not accept that we could continue to plunder the Earth's resources and exploit people just to make stuff to buy that we don't need, to impress people we don't know. But I worked in fashion. I still work in fashion. Yes, I shan't read that. Someone once thought that was real. I was like, that's not a no. That's not a real label in a garment. Oh, I worked in fashion. This is a picture of me from 2008, 7. You wonder why my podcast is called Wardrobe Crisis, because I had a personal wardrobe crisis, although we'd normally talk about it being more important than that, a collective wardrobe crisis for humanity, looking at sustainability in fashion. But actually, I just had too many clothes. You can see at the bottom there. This actually was from a magazine called Shop Till You Drop, no longer with us. Funny. At the bottom it says a peek inside her overflowing wardrobe, and it's sold to you like that's really ace. Don't we all want an overflowing wardrobe? Fashion is so dumb. I used to write these things. I told you I was going to tell you a story and rewind back to my early days of working in magazines, when we accepted not injustice, but little things that just sucked. This is a picture of my actual desk. It's not, I couldn't find one, but I Googled, and this literally looks like a picture of my actual desk. So when I worked in magazines, I worked at independent publications like Oyster, where they could only pay me every other week, so I had to work in a pub the rest of the time. I worked at Harper's Bazaar, I worked at Rolling Stone, which was super. And then I got my dream job in the mid-2000s, and I worked at Vogue. I thought it was going to be so glamorous. The offices at that time were near the airport at the bottom of Burke Road, before there were sourdough bakeries in Alexandria. And this is a picture of my actual desk. In the office were creative geniuses and Vogue divas who loved to imagine a beautiful world, sitting at desks like that, with a buzzing fluorescent strip light over our heads, with nylon carpet separating us from each other's egos. And did we complain about it? No, actually not. We probably complained, but did we do anything about it? No, we just accepted it, because that's how offices were. Everywhere. Is anyone old enough to remember sitting in one of those? Thank you.
Worse.
We used to call the cafe cup of poison. Well, but fast forward and things did change. By 2014, Wired had made this into a meme. Offices looked better. This is an actual cover from Vogue when I worked at it in the early 2000s. We sat in the grey nylon carpeted cubicle, but we talked about being rich, going on yachts, and buying our wedding dresses from Dior. I don't know, you probably can't read that, but that is Donald Trump's new bride. The ring, the dress, the wedding, the jet, the party. She got the dress from Dior, it cost $200,000. She married Donald Trump, oof. What's funny about that, though, to me, is that inside there was a story by a very good writer, she's brilliant, actually, you know, a writer that I really respect, Sally Singer, and she's writing How to Marry a Billionaire. You know, that's what we aspired to. This is what we thought fashion should be, from our grey cubicles. But then also on the cover there's a little reality check, because we didn't have any money, because we all earned like 24 grand a year. So, priceless. $50 to $5,000, how to put together a luxe high-low look. And I remember writing those stories about how to buy a fast fashion knockoff from Zara. And I never knew that there was a problem with that. I did look from the outside like I was living the dream. In 2014, I got to go to the AmFA Gala in LA with them. That really happened. I went with Miley Cyrus. I sat next to her mum. On the table opposite was Riri with Tom Ford. On the next table was Justin Timberlake. I'm with some guy there whose name escapes me, from MAC Cosmetics. That's why I got to go and stay in a fancy hotel and believe for a moment that I lived this billionaire's dream. It was so funny. At the end, Diana Ross came out in this giant inflatable Victor and Rolf purple gown, and everyone stood up. It was actually so good. There are some good things about working in mags. Everyone stood up around the tables, like Sharon Stone and JT, and all danced to Diana Ross. Come on. I also, at the end of my career, got to do what I'd always, in magazines, what I'd always wanted to do, which was go to the shows and report on the trends. I used to go to London Fashion Week and Milan Fashion Week regularly, and it was wonderful. I loved it. But fashion was also about this. Remember that? Then this. My job was to encourage you to believe that what you spent all of your earnings on last season was no longer valid, and that you would be somehow less if you continued to wear it, because not just Vogue, but all the fashion people, all the different magazines, all the editors and all the big designers said, it's out now, you suck. We're preying on your insecurity, accept it. And it was all so fast. The same year that I went to the Amphar Gala with Miley Cyrus's mum, the Rana Plaza factory disaster happened in Bangladesh. Actually, was that the year before? April the 24th, 2013. So I was aware about fashion's dark side. Does everyone know about this? We actually had the 10-year anniversary of this last 2 weeks ago. I won't go on about it, but I would encourage you to look it up if you don't remember it or know it. Essentially, a building complex outside of Dhaka, Bangladesh, in Sabah, collapsed, killing 1,138 people, most of whom were sewing clothes for low-cost brands in the global north and in Australia. It was a preventable disaster. I'd love you to listen to the podcast episode we did on this a couple of weeks ago if you want to get the full story. But I'm showing you this to contrast the dark and the light side of fashion as it still is today. I knew about Rana Plaza. I knew in 2013, when it was all over the news, that I was working in an industry that was connected with terrible human rights atrocities. And we were talking about supply chains before. It became evident after Rana Plaza that supply chains were very murky, that we didn't really know who made our clothes in many cases, that going to the fashion shows and seeing all the beauty did nothing to connect us with the people who make our clothes, or the environmental impacts of that manufacturing process, or the way clothes often end up. This slide shows a just stupid stat that I refuse to accept, but that is valid, which is that every second around the globe, 1 truckload of clothing and textiles is either incinerated or chucked in the landfill. That's completely crazy. Also crazy is fashion's climate impact. Now, in 2013-14, I'd never even heard of this. But now I understand, as we all have seen the research evolve and as I've dived deeper into this, that fashion has a huge impact on our carbon emissions. So that's the stat. McKinsey reckons it's 4%. Some reckon it could be as close as 10% of global emissions are linked to the fashion industry. That's textiles, so it's not just Milan catwalks. It could be your carpets and curtains, right? But it's a huge amount of of emissions linked to the textile industry. About the same as the total emissions of Germany, France and the UK combined. I'm going to put this down now. So when I started to figure out this stuff, I realised I wanted to make a change and I wanted to do something different. But I didn't just wake up after Rana Plaza or when I got home from LA and Miley and think, right, I'm going to be an activist. I'm no longer going to accept this. Of course I didn't, because we have to take small steps towards making change. I dived into trying to learn more. I'm a journalist, so I research things. I'm not the expert. I'm a connector to the experts. I get to interview these amazing people who've done deep research on this. But I started in my tentative way doing research. Fast forward, and 10 years later, I've changed completely in my work. I now work in sustainability, using my skills as a writer, as a journalist, as a communicator, to try to connect people with that seemingly disconnected, vast divide from something very beautiful to something potentially very damaging. But then to try and think about what the solutions are. The good thing is I'm not alone. Back then, very few people in my industry, in my peer group that I would talk to knew anything about this, just like I didn't. Now, people know this stuff. On this slide, you can see two things that I think are worth pointing out. One is, that's actually a picture of Chile's Atacama Desert, riddled with textile waste. These images were in the news last year. We're nearly finished, don't you worry. Why are our textiles and clothing littering once wild places? People are up in arms about this. They don't want to see this. They see it on the mainstream news. They know, they see it. And then on the other side there you can see, which I think is just fantastic. A few years ago, all the news headlines were reporting on Black Friday as a bonanza of excitement where you could get new duds. Now they're reporting on protests happening where people are using that day, Black Friday, as a day of protest to say, stop making cheap, fast clothes. We don't want your cheap, rubbish, disposable fashion. I think that's amazing. It just wouldn't have happened a few years ago. So in 2018, I pitched to Vogue that I should be their sustainability editor, and they said yes, which was amazing. And I got to work for a legacy magazine, doing what I'd always done in a way, but talking about the issues that mattered. They let me do that because people have changed, because the readers changed, because they've changed, because we've all started to say it's unacceptable to consume without considering what the impacts might be. I'd grown in confidence. I'd taught myself to speak in front of a crowd, which I used to hate, because it's not about me, it's about the message that I want to put forward. It's about meeting you and hearing what you want to do for change. I'd also grown in confidence enough 2 years later to say, I don't want to do it anymore, because even though I do think it's important, I think it's great that magazines have sustainability editors, I didn't actually think that I could do the best work within those confines. So I refused to accept that, which, looking back, I never would have dared do that before. I dared greatly. I wrote this book about climate change and activism in many other realms. Again, I dared to do something that people would have said, well, who are you to do that? You write about frocks. These days, I spend my life interviewing people about sustainability and fashion on my podcast to try to make change. This is my form of activism. Not to be the one telling you what to do, but to introduce you to people who know way more than me about how we could arrange things differently in the industry that I know, which is fashion. And here is a snapshot of the Rana Plaza episode that I mentioned before. Please do listen to it. We interviewed these incredible change makers from different aspects of the supply chain in Bangladesh. I also do still get the thrills. It may not be Riri. I felt more delighted and excited to interview Bob Brown a couple of weeks ago than I did to be near Justin Timberlake. Fact. We can change. We can change what we care about, what we shape our work around, what we decide to take action on. By the way, this is a very important film. If you haven't seen it, it's called The Giants, about Bob's life as a forest protector. And I did just want to share with you that poster before I finish, because as creatives, I started off talking about how every day as a creative in a creative job, you get some kind of possibility of taking action to communicate a message. I think this is one of the finest communications around the climate that I've ever seen. And I'm not alone. Have you ever seen this before? The Franklin colour ad that was in all the newspapers? I was not around, but you can look it up. So in 1982, after a few years of campaigning to save the Franklin, this was an ad that was commissioned by Bob's organisation, the Tasmanian Wilderness Society, and a group of other activist organisations. And it was using the power of colour photography to shock armchair potential activists around the country into wishing to protect the wild and incredible beauty of Tasmania's Franklin River that was threatened with being flooded by dams for hydroelectric power. And that's interesting because until this time, everything was black and white. And suddenly, the power of a colour image with a really strong message could galvanise action and activism across the country. I love that. As you can see, I did ask Bob what to wear to a protest because I'm still in fashion. All right, I started off quoting Brene Brown and Teddy Roosevelt. I wanted to end quoting another extraordinary person, of course Jane Goodall, but I think what she says there is a really lovely thing that I'd love you to put in your minds and take with you through the day. Every day we make some impact on the planet. This is the good bit. The cumulative effect of millions of small ethical actions will truly make a difference. It matters what you do as an individual. You do not need to be the icon. You do not need to be the most famous person in the room. You just need to refuse to accept stuff that you think sucks and dare greatly. Oh, this is what officers look like today. These are actual pictures of officers. The one on the right is Condé Nast Entertainment. Look at it. Things can change. Thank you.
Big loud voice, go for it.
I was just wondering if there's a company that you kind of regard as like a leader in terms of, sustainable fashion that's kind of like
Yeah.
back in like a,
Great question, thank you. What's your name?
Gary.
Gary said, is there a company that I would recommend as a leader in sustainable fashion? Thank you. There are loads. There are some extraordinary companies changing that story of devastation of people and planet. There really are, and that's how we can get inspired. The obvious one that jumps to mind there, just thinking about the Franklin and about Bob Brown, and the current campaign to save the Tarkine is Patagonia, the activist company. They may not think of themselves as fashion, but they do make clothes, and they are extraordinary in terms of their mission to create change through a brand. But we can also talk about some smaller Australian ones. We can talk about people like Clingy bags. I'm serious, because actually the smaller brands where you have designers with integrity who are trying to prove, the speaker, who are trying to prove that there's a different way of doing things is actually really important. And think about Jane Goodall and the cumulative nature of them all together. Another one in Australia is Outland Denim, if you want to look into them. They're not a social enterprise, but they are a socially aware B Corp that are changing the game for supply chain transparency and integrity. So thank you, good question. But there's a million, yeah.
Who else has a question?
Sorry, just the big ones, boycott.
Ooh,
Or was that the
are you Pippa?
Who should we boycott?
Pepita, okay, Pepita said, who should we boycott? She said it in such a nice way, but actually it's a really valid question. And also I would ask, before we say who should we boycott? In 2017, when I started my podcast, I interviewed an amazing Bangladeshi activist union leader named Kalpana Akhter, who was a child worker when she was 15 in a factory just like those in Rana Plaza. And she said to me, don't boycott Bangladesh. I want you to walk alongside us. I don't want you to say that you're not going to support us, because how do we grow an ethical industry if we turn our back on it and say, you guys suck, you as a country sucks? Of course, that's not valid. Could we boycott particular brands? I do. I like to boycott Fashion Nova. I like to boycott Boohoo. But I think it's an interesting question, and thank you for asking it. I think it comes down to your own personal capacity as well as ethics, because not everyone can afford to buy expensive things. Let's remember that. So it's the system that needs to change. But within that, sure, if you've got the capacity to make a better choice, and if you want to be an activist around slagging off a brand that you think is really bad, do it. One more thing I would say is, I've been thinking a lot about how brands are just places where people work. I used to work for brands. I work for magazine brands. So I don't know about demonising brands if we're not being careful for the fact that people work within them. And a lot of them are trying to do good jobs within that. Thank you. Yes?
Greenpeace just slammed a whole heap of companies that were being seen to be doing the right thing, pretending to be sustainable and trying to get that market by that angle.
Yeah.
And of course they're cutting corners and they're not really doing anything at all. What's really difficult is for people in the mainstream to actually know which companies to support and which ones aren't, and nobody has the time to do that research. Someone needs to do more about trying to make that really, really simple. Companies to stay away from, companies to support. Michael West did that as far as the top 10 countries or top 10 countries.
What's your question?
Oh no, I'm like, I want you to say.
We've got, we've got the people making the stuff, and then we've got the people. That in between is what we need to focus on, and that's where we're getting lost.
Is it Josephine? So I'm
Yes,
trying to
it
read that. Thank you, Josephine. That's actually such an important point, and I love it. Josephine said Greenpeace recently called out greenwashers, brands that use this passion that people have, this guilt feeling people have, to sell us more stuff by pretending to be, or maybe not pretending to be, but being seen to be green, or making a load of fuss about one sustainability capsule that's really small over here while carrying on doing all the bad stuff over here. And then she said, what do we do? Because it's really difficult to cut through that. Such a good point. I don't have a quick answer on that, but I think the first thing we do is try to get aware, get educated on what greenwashing is. It's not just fashion, we see it in the energy sector, we see it everywhere actually. We see it in food. Think about it as being vague and misleading claims, using wishy-washy words that don't mean much, eco, green. That doesn't mean they're lying, but look further. Can they prove it? Do they give you more rich information to back it up? I don't think we should presume everyone's lying. I actually think a lot of greenwashing happens because of a lack of education in marketing departments. This is a whole other talk. But I think it's such a good point. Thank you for making it. I think the answer is just we have to do more research.
Well, the average person doesn't.
No. And then we have to legislate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But if someone like you can make that easy, here's 20 companies you should support, here's 20 companies you should stay away from, and one click will tell someone straight away whether they should buy from there or not. Would be a lot easier.
Good point. Thank you. Do you have one there? Talia.
Hi. Do you mind sharing a bit more around when you decided to leave Vogue and start, I don't know if the podcast was the first thing or the book was the first thing, but just how you kind of made that decision, what was going on in your mind and deciding to leave that and start something else?
It wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. I'd worked in magazines. Oh, sorry. Talia asked, could I share some of my headspace around what it was that allowed me to leave my job at Vogue and what made me do that and why I decided that was the right thing to do. And I was saying it wasn't a dramatic thing. I had an amazing opportunity by being allowed to create this space to work as a sustainability editor. I was the first one, to my knowledge, in the world anywhere. I made up the title. I just said, could I be this? They're like, all right, what? But they believed in me and they gave me that scope, and it was really good. I did it for 2 years. I felt constrained. I honestly had worked in magazines for nearly 2 decades and I wanted to do something else. I'd already started the podcast. I started it a few years before. I'd already written the book Wardrobe Crisis and was in the process of publishing the one about activism. I just thought I could do more. I feel like people relate to this. You can't do, if you're creative, you can't do the same thing over and over again. You just lose your mojo. So I stepped away from that and it was good, and now other people do it, which is also good. But I would encourage you to, you don't have to, again, talking about not accepting things because, so I was saying don't accept things just because it's the way we always do it, but also I think the power is not accepting things because everyone else thinks that it's wonderful or because it comes with status or security. Not everyone has the privilege to be able to reject that, but I did. I was able to do that, and it's quite liberating to say, people are like, you must be mad, why would you leave that? But I was happy. Thank you for asking. Do we have time for another one?
One more. We've got time for one more question.
Actually, two questions.
Okay.
So, do you have any upcoming talks that we could maybe join?
That is very kind. Ask a real question.
My question is, where do you get your news from? How do you stay updated on the topic? Because this is what I find is important. Like, if you want to become more educated ourselves, what resources do you go to?
Awesome.
For your news? Yeah.
Thank you. What was your name again?
Kate.
Kate. I met you before, sorry Kate. Too many meetings. a very kind non-question, where can you find out what I'm doing? Well, I've got a new book coming out in October. If you're into fashion, please have a look at it. It's about the future, and I tried to make it unexpected. I interviewed spiritual ecologists and talked to people about the process of commoning, and didn't just want to make it about a new shoe. But the better question, Kate, was where can all of you find resources if you are motivated to be more sustainable or look into sustainability? Should we stick with fashion? Otherwise I could be here all day. The good news is there is an extraordinary plethora of resources if you want to check this stuff out. If you're worried about, as Josephine said, what brands are doing and you want a quick top line bit of intel on how to make good decisions, you can get the free app, Good On You. It's not going to tell you everything, but it's going to help you begin to be more informed about what you choose to support with your cash. Fashion Revolution is a global organisation, consumer-focused campaign that began after Rana Plaza to encourage people to ask who made my clothes and be more transparent.
Sorry, what was that one?
Fashion Revolution. It's got a website in every country, but you can just look at the main one, and loads of resources on there if you want to read, deep dive into reports on supply chain transparency, any of that stuff. Really good. Check out Fashion Revolution. And I think I'm going to end on brands, because we're actually, so if you're really into this, if you're a nerd and you want to find out, we're seeing a lot more communication from brands around sustainability. So I'm not saying that they are definitely the greatest source of information on this, but looking at sustainability pages on brands that you like will actually educate you a lot on the kinds of things they're talking about: circularity, waste, whether or not they tell you who makes their stuff and how, are they paying a living wage. So I actually think if you like, that could be quite a good thing to do. Thank you, Kate.
Guys, that's it for this month, for today. Thank you to Clare. Huge round of applause.